Today's episode is brought to you by Focal, a global leader in high-fidelity solutions. Since 1979, Focal has designed and developed innovations and technologies in France for speaker drivers, high-fidelity loudspeakers, home audio speakers, headphones, and more. Be part of the Focal experience at focal.com. Today's episode is also sponsored by Schmitt Audio. Schmitt Audio designs and builds audio components in California. Based in Valencia, their wide line of amps, DACs, and audio accessories fit any budget, starting at $49. For a full rundown of all their products, visit Schmitt.com or stop by their retail store in Old Newhall, just north of Los Angeles. That's www.schmitt.com. This episode is also brought to you by Bryston. Bryston amplifiers have an equally exceptional reputation in the recording studio and the audiophile home because their sound is clear and true. Bryston amplifiers are also backed by the industry's best warranty, 20 years. Upgrade your amp to a Bryston today. Visit www.bryston.com. That's BRYSTON.com. This Tuesday, I woke up to the very sad news that legendary engineer and producer Al Schmitt had passed away. I had seen Al speak at several events in the Los Angeles area in conjunction with Capitol Studios. Al's work in the music industry has garnered him 22 Grammys, and he has worked as an engineer or producer with Sam Cooke, Todo, Neil Young, Paul McCartney, Diana Krall, and even Frank Sinatra. He has worked with many greats and has many great stories to tell. I got a chance to interview Al when he was promoting his book, Al Schmitt on the Record, for Stereophile's Audiostream podcast. Originally appearing as a two-part series, I've included the interview here in its entirety. I think it provides just a little insight into who the man was and his large body of work. I certainly appreciate Al's lifelong efforts to make many of the songs that I love just a little bit better. Hope you guys enjoy. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining today. With us in the studio, Al Schmitt, legendary engineer and producer, multi Grammy-winning. Has worked with the likes of Jefferson Airplane, Todo, Sam Cooke, Diana Krall, Frank Sinatra,
Bob Dylan, Neil Young. The list goes on and on.
Legends in the field. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So, in your resume, you have a lot of credits for both engineer and producer. Can you help kind of just define what those different roles are for our listeners as we start here?
Sure. An engineer is someone who captures the sound in the studio and mixes the record and so forth. A producer is he's like a director in a film. He finds material for artists that don't write their own material. He does the budgets for the album. He hires the contractor who hires the musicians. He hires the arranger if it's going to be strings and horns and things. So he's got a lot more responsibility than the engineer.
And of those two roles that you've done countless times, do you have anyone that you prefer, or is there particular aspects to either that you like better?
Yeah, I prefer engineering. For me, it's why I got in the business, why I started. When I was at RCA as an engineer, producers would come in and they'd be on the phone all the time, and I'd be doing all the work. And I finally talked to my boss and said, listen, I want to be a producer because they're getting all the credit and all the money and everything. And so they promoted me to a producer, and I wound up with 11 artists that I was producing. And it was Sam Cooke and Eddie Fisher and Glenn Yarborough and Jefferson Airplane, Hot Tuna. So... yeah, that was it. And it was just an awful lot of work, 11 artists. And back in those days, you could do do an album in 2 days, and we didn't have to go through all the multi-tracking and so forth. So, but it still was a lot of work, and I decided to get back into engineering. While I was a producer at RCA, I was not allowed to touch the board union rules, with
Why was that exactly? Because
it was the engineering union there, and they didn't want anybody who wasn't in the union touching the board.
Did that drive you nuts?
That drove me crazy, and I would get called up on all the time because I would reach over to do something, and someone would turn me in, and it was kind of wacky.
I guess you had to really learn how to communicate with your engineer. I guess you would pick engineers. Even in the book you talk about your brother.
Yeah, my brother, and I had a lot of great engineers. Hank Sacalo, my brother. There were a lot of great ones. The problem was by the time I tell them
you could have done
what to do, I would have done it, and it would have been done. And this way, it was always a little late. So Anyway, my friend Tommy LaPuma, a great record producer, asked me to do a favor for him to mix a record. And it was Dave Mason record, Alone Together. And Bruce Botnick, the engineer for the Doors and all, he was the engineer on the record. And he had a prior commitment on a certain day to start with the Doors. So he left, and Tommy and I were good friends. We used to hang out together all the time. And he said, Al, you used to engineer. Yeah. You think you want to finish this record for me? I said, oh, Tommy, I don't think I could do it anymore. I haven't touched the board in 5 years. And he said, oh, come on, it's like riding on a bike. So I said, all right, I'll give it a try. And I did. And as I got into mixing that record, I realized how much that's the reason I got into business and how much I missed it. And I made up my mind then and there that I would start doing more engineering. So I was still doing some producing, but I would produce and engineer, like with Neil Young on the Beach or Jackson Browne, Late for the Sky. I co-produced and engineered. But I slowly got away from it, at the producing part. And now I don't produce at all anymore. I do favors for people once in a while, and I'll go in and produce something for nothing. If it's somebody I really like and they're looking for some help, and I'll go and do that. But mostly all I do now is engineer.
So when I'm a child of the 90s, 80s and 90s, and when I was growing up, the first thing I ever had was a 4-track Tascam. I don't know if you're familiar with this machine.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It was large. The sound quality was horrendous. And every time you did a down dub, the sound, the noise floor goes up. And today we see items like this one that we're recording on right now that have barely any noise floor, and they go straight to digital, and they're literally a miracle to that child that was sitting there.
Exactly.
Your experience goes way farther back than even that. I'm just curious if you have any kind of observations about the changing technology and how we capture sound now, and if you think what are the positives and the negatives to doing things the old way that you remember and what we do now?
Well, the positives of what we do now is that we were able to edit so quickly, move things around. We have unlimited tracks, which is, for me, a problem. I like the old way of recording, where you had everybody in the room at the same time, and you recorded. It went to tape or acetate before tape. But it went to tape, and that's the record. And there was no overdubbing this. Singers knew, sang in tune. It's not, it's not like it is today, where everything is pitched. There's something to be said about having an orchestra or a band or whatever together in the same room, because they play off one another, And when you got a drummer in San Diego and a guitar player in San Francisco and a keyboard player in Kalamazoo somewhere. They're not playing off one another. They don't. The drummer will do something that will trigger something for the guitar player to play, and then he'll play that, and then the drummer will realize what happened there, and he'll play off that. So it's, I don't know, it's just a whole team package, and you know what you're getting right away. It's not like, it's not like it takes 6 months to do something. The first album I did with the Jefferson Airplane after Bathing at Baxter's took 5 months. I never worked on an album longer than a week in my life, and this took 5 months. So
now, is that because of extracurricular activities?
There was a lot of that. There was an awful lot of extracurricular activity, but there was also writing songs on the session, that kind of thing. Who would play what, and it just took forever. It came out great, and I loved the record, and I love working with them. I learned a lot from them, but I still, like the old way. With the Airplane, we did pretty much everything was done. Certainly all the rhythm parts were done at one time with everybody together. So that was kind of nice because we knew what we were getting there, but it took forever. I would have 125 tracks of one take, one tune, just the rhythm parts, trying to figure out what was the right one, what was whatever. So, we never erased anything, so it was just tape piling up.
Were they giving you a lot of input on the back end, or was it kind of all left up to you?
No, they were absolutely. It was definitely a team effort. They had a lot of input, and there was a lot of back and forth and so forth. It was great that way, and I learned an awful lot about making records in the way they would back then.
Sure.
So
was it kind of like herding cats though too a little bit with that?
It was. Yeah, it was definitely doing that. I can remember sitting in the studio at 8:00. We're supposed to start, and the phone rang. I picked the phone up, and it was a member of the Airplane, and said, "Are we in the studio tonight, Al?" I said, "Yeah, 8:00. I'm here waiting for you guys." "Okay, we'll get the next plane down." They were in San Francisco, so I had to sit around. They took a plane down, and then we started probably around 11:30, 12 o'clock at night recording. So things like that went on.
And in the book, you talk about, because you're producing at this point for RCA, you had Eddie Fisher all during the day.
Two to 5 with Eddie Fisher, and the Airplane later.
When did you sleep?
And that was the problem. I didn't get much sleep. And that's when I turned in my resignation and left. But
they brought you back. Jefferson Airplane brought you back as an independent producer.
Yeah, right? Exactly. And I made a hell of a lot more money doing one act than I did doing 11 with RCA. So it was a good move for me to leave RCA. Gave me a lot more freedom, a lot more time with my family, a lot more sleep. What would happen with the Airplane is, I'd be doing Eddie Fisher 2 to 5, and then I'd take a break and I'd go to my office, and I was into transcendental meditation. I would meditate for like an hour and up there and kind of recharge. And then I would come down to the studio with the Airplane, and we would work from 8 to like 11 and get quite a bit done. And then the celebrities started showing up, and David Crosby would come. And they would all come and hang out. And then it became almost party time from 11 till we quit at 3, 4 in the morning. Yeah, it was a really interesting experience.
Do you think, in terms of the drug use, and this is just kind of a random question that I had for you, do you think in terms of the drug use do people actually become more creative in your experience when they're on drugs? Or is it just something that creative people end up doing?
No, I don't. I don't think you become more creative on drugs. Acid, you may go to another space and come up with some ideas for something, but 90% of the time those things don't work. And no, I know I became more creative when I totally stopped drinking and drugs, and I just cut it all off at one time, cigarette smoke, everything, and it made my life better. I had a better relationship with people. I didn't get as angry as quickly. So there were a lot of things, but I prefer sobriety, and I think that's when people are most creative.
I did want to ask you about one other thing on that topic, because you do talk about transcendental meditation in the book, but and in remaining calm under pressure and these type of things that help you along your path. But on the back of the book, there's a quote from Neil Young saying, "Al's the master. I love it when he gets pissed off. He's great." Can you kind of explain what you meant by all that?
Well, I used to have a temper, and I would go off on people when things weren't going right, and things. And so I stopped that, and I don't get pissed off anymore, and I bite my tongue. I'm a lot more easy to be around. Everything had to be done quick when I was young. I was into things. I felt like I was the best in the world at what I was doing, and I just wanted to get everything going. And so, and when guys would make mistakes, I'd go off on them sometimes. So I learned a big lesson from that in the book, where I learned not to do that, because when they make a mistake and you get on them, they're so concerned about it that they make another mistake, and then it gets really
everyone's on edge. Yeah,
a little out of hand. So I learned to talk to my assistants. If you make a mistake, just come and tell me, and forget about it. I'll take care of it. So for the last 35 years, I've been doing that, and it's made my life easier, the assistants' life easier, and it works that way. So I take the blame for it, and I don't point my finger at somebody else and say it was their fault. I'll say, hey, I made a mistake, we got to do this again or something, and try to cover it up so it's not a big deal. And if I make a mistake, they don't get really mad at me, but if the assistant makes it and they know it's him, then they get a little pissed at him. Maybe they want a better assistant in there and so forth. So I kind of like to take the blame when it's not necessary.
But I would also like to point out that the job which you do probably differs from a lot of other people's jobs, in that there is a concentrated amount of people and action happening, and time is, I assume, always of the essence. There's never time to sit back and, we'll just take care of it in a week, right? Everything is of the moment, right?
Exactly.
Do you have any stories about a giant meltdown? Like, what's the biggest thing that ever went wrong in a session?
Whoa. A couple of times things in the console would go down, and we'd have to kind of hang out for an hour or two to get that back on. And when that happens, there's a momentum that you lose. That's one of the reasons I love working like at Capitol or in Avatar in New York, or the Power Station now, or Abbey Road in London. The maintenance crews are so great. Everything works. And at Capitol, if something goes wrong, there's a guy down. There's 3 guys come down, and boom, they pull this thing out, fix it. 2 minutes. You don't have time to go outside and have a cigarette if you smoke. So, I love that, the fact that I work at studios where everything works all the time, and you don't have that downtime. I'm telling you, we've had to cancel sessions because of it. When earlier, I went to Nashville to mix a record for Jimmy Bowen. And it was right at the beginning of automation. And we'd automate something and go and put a mix, and then it would just lose it. And we had to do it again. It just happened for like 3 days. And finally, Jimmy said, Al,
I'm done.
Go home. Go back to L.A. I'll call you when they get all this shit going. So, yeah, it was things like that. So if you got a deadline and you want to get something done, that
exactly.
happens.
Time is money, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Has a magical take ever disappeared into the ether?
Oh, they're all magical, right?
Behind a broken microphone or a broken cable somewhere?
No. Just the opposite, actually, on times when, I can't tell you how many times it's the first take that becomes the take. Mm-hmm. I know when I did the Benson album, Breezin', I think we did 6 tunes, but of the 6 tunes, 5 of them were the first take.
Wow.
And even the vocal. And when it came time to do the vocal, and I had everybody sitting around the drummer, Harvey Mason, including George. So I figured, well, we're not going to get a vocal out. It'll be a guide vocal, and we'll overdub it later. So I just grabbed this EV666 microphone, probably worth $90 or something, stuck it on George, figuring we'd do the vocal. He killed that vocal. And that's the one that's on the record.
In the book, you actually say that for the second album, he wanted the exact same mic.
He did. He wanted that. That was his lucky charm. Where is that mic, he kept saying.
And you were like, yeah, you can get great sound on a cheap mic, right?
Well, it worked on that record, And
and that's kind of what you're known for, right? Is like, if the artists like Bob Dylan or Neil Young or even Frank Sinatra, when you did duets, like they're all in the room together, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's about mic placement for you, right?
Yeah, exactly, and that's what you capture. When that vocal with the rhythm section and keyboards and everything, that's you hear it come through the speakers, and that's the way it's going to sound to everybody. And it's maybe not as good because our speakers and our systems are better than most, but that's it. And I love that. I love the fact that when you capture that first take. I remember doing sessions where we'd be up to take 12 on something, and then can we go back and listen to that first take? And the magic was there all along. We were trying to improve on the magic, and we just kept going the other way.
Is it like the there's a spontaneity to it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I really love the idea that you talked about, where it's the magic of bringing up the faders the first time when everything's set up and you don't know exactly how it's going to sound when everybody's playing, I'm assuming, and then you just bring it up, and I'm like, oh, that must be like a magical moment the first time. Yeah. Everything's set, you don't know how it's going to sound, then you go, and then it all comes in.
Yeah, especially when it's like a big band or something, and it just, the speakers just light up, that just this big sound comes out at you. Yeah, it's exciting. I love what I do. Maybe that's one of the reasons I'm as good as I am at it, because I don't feel like I work. I tell this all the time. I lie to my wife every day when I tell her I'm going to work. Because it's not work. I get in the car and I say, "Thank you, God." I'm going in to work with Diana Krall, or I'm going in to work with George Benson, or I'm, Neil Young, Dylan, Paul McCartney, one of my favorite experiences of all, working with him. Those are, it's just great. I don't know how anybody can bitch about doing that kind of stuff,
And actually, just speaking of Sir Paul McCartney, so your book, Al Schmitt on the Record, The Magic Behind the Music, Paul actually writes the foreword to your book.
Yeah.
I mean, what an honor, huh?
That was an honor. I just got the President's Award at the Latin Grammys. It just passed, and a bunch of people sent videos, and Todo guys did, and Paul McCartney, certainly, David Foster. But Paul sent this beautiful video, and he does it every time. If I'm getting something, somebody will call Paul and say, "There he is." He sends It's amazing.
I mean, you got to pinch yourself a little bit, right?
I do, here I am friends with him. We were in London working together at Abbey Road 2, and he told, a lot of stories about the Beatles, which is where they did all their records. And but anyway, I was standing outside, and I was talking to my daughter on the phone. It was her birthday. And he walked out, and he stood in front of me, and I pointed to the phone. I said, it's my daughter's birthday. He took the phone, sang happy birthday to her, gave me the phone back. My daughter said, oh, my God. She said, I didn't record it. And, Dad, nobody's going to believe this.
That's pretty amazing. So let's take it back a little bit. Let's talk a little. So you're born in Brooklyn.
Absolutely.
And big Dodgers fan, right?
Absolutely.
To this day. So actually, your Uncle Harry, he worked as an engineer. Is that correct?
He owned his own studio. He originally was an engineer at one of the big record labels in Brunswick Records, I think it was. And then he started the first independent recording studio in New York City. So he was recording everybody. And Les Paul was his best friend. They hung out, they were drinking buddies, they were always together. So Les was like my uncle, and I got to hang out with these guys all the time. And he had this studio, and everybody would come there. They did Frank Sinatra's first ever recording there. A lot of the Bing Crosby would be there, the Andrews Sisters, Orson Welles, when he did the War of the Worlds, and he would be there. Art Tatum would come down to show me little boogie-woogie licks on the piano.
And what were you doing? Were you in the corner sweeping the floor?
I was sweeping. I was
Coffee?
cleaning patch cords. In those days, they had the big dual patch cords, and you had the paste that you put on and rub them and clean them and keep them clean so that they would all work right. I'd clean up the chip off the acetates as they were cutting. They didn't have suction back then. I'd have to go out and tell all the musicians to take their shoes off because you could hear the tapping,
Oh, as they were playing, yeah.
So So it was great. I mean, I spent every weekend when I was like 8 till I was about 13 at my uncle's studio.
And this is what, during the war, right? Like early 40s?
Yeah. This was, and it's all I ever wanted to do, We were really poor living in Brooklyn, and my father worked 6 days a week, and I think he was making $17.50 a week. And I would go see Harry, my Uncle Harry, who was my father's brother. But he was my uncle, but he was also my godfather, and he didn't have any children, so I was like his son. And when I would leave to go back home on Sunday, he'd put me on the subway, he'd give me a $20 bill. And I would go home and give it to my mother. That was more than my father made working all week. And, we went to all the Madison Square Garden, the hockey games, all the big fights he took me to, great restaurants, all the things I never got at home, and it was, it was in my blood, I think, to want to do that.
And then so you do a stint in the Navy, and when you get back, your uncle actually helps you get a job at Apex Studios there in New York, right?
The guy that owned Apex, Schilling, his name was Shoeing. He and my uncle were best of friends, and they were looking for someone to break in as an assistant. So my uncle got me the job there, and I went over and talked to the guy, and I knew I was going to get the job because my uncle and this guy were best of friends. So he told me, show up 9 o'clock Monday morning, you got the gig. And so I got there Monday at 9, and he took me in and introduced me to the 2 engineers that worked there, and one of them was Tom Dowd. For like 8 years, I worked on and off with Tom. Yeah, he was an amazing guy, an amazing engineer, and a dear friend. I was like his kid brother, and we got along really well, and he would go out of his way to help me with things, and it was, an amazing experience. it was Saturday. It was like demo day, and somebody would come in and play Happy Birthday to their daughter on guitar and sing, and we'd make the acetate and give it to them. And then someone else would come in and play piano and sing a song they had just written, and we'd make the acetate and give it to them, and so forth. And this first Saturday, I'm working doing this. I'm waiting for Mr. Mercer to come in. Well, Mr. Mercer was Mercer Ellington, Duke Ellington's son. They had a label called Mercer Records, and the whole Duke Ellington band showed up. And you got to get the book and read the story in the book, because I was scared of that.
But Duke Ellington came in because he was, I guess, producing it, right?
Duke came and sat next to me, and he looked at me, and I think he thought I was going to faint at any minute. I was 19. And he said, I kept saying to him, I'm not qualified to do this. It's been a big mistake. I couldn't reach Tommy or my boss. And he said, well, it looks good out there. All the musicians are all set, and everything looks great. And he kept patting me on the leg saying, don't worry, son, we're going to get through this, He was so kind to me. We recorded 4 songs, and
how did it sound?
Came out pretty good. Not the best I've ever done, but not bad. I did this. I recorded a big band. I mean, the Duke Ellington, Billy Strayhorn on piano, and Johnny Hodges, all those great players. And I mean, these guys were my idols. When these guys started walking, it was like Babe Ruth and Joe DiMaggio coming in. These were my heroes. So that made it even more difficult.
Sure.
If I didn't know the band, it might have been one thing. But, yeah, it was, it got me started, though, because it gave me confidence that, I could do this,
Like, you have to talk to these musicians. You may hold them in high regard, but you're working with them, and they're just people too. Like, you have to communicate with each other.
Absolutely, they're your best friend. I love musicians. Every date I'm out there in the studio talking to them, finding out how their kids are, and what's going on in their lives, and the same. I mean, we become friends. And it's great. And if you're not sure where to place a mic on a certain instrument or something, talk to the musician. He'll say, well, the last time they put it right over here, and it sounded pretty good. So now you got a place to start. You got to be friends with the musicians. You want to keep them happy, because a happy musician will give you better sounds and play better. Absolutely.
A lot of audiophiles really like the sound of Diana Krall's records. They're like a big fan. And I, for one, when I do a review of certain audio products, I use Diana Krall tracks. It's very, very common to demo her stuff to show off the best your system can do, which I feel is like a great credit to the engineering and the production on all those records. Is there anything specific that you do different with a woman like Diana Krall in terms of miking her or to get that sound? Because for my ears, the records are so detailed. There's so much nuance to her voice. Is there anything special that goes on for the records that you've worked on her with?
No, nothing special. I mean, we use a great microphone. Originally, when we started, we were recording at Avatar in New York. And we had a 67. That was really a great sounding 67. And we used that on her. And then when we came out to California, by accident, they were doing a video, and I put this mic on her. It's the Frank Sinatra mic. And when she heard it in her earphone, she said, Al, what is this? And I told her what it was, and she said, oh, my God. So we started using it on all her vocals. And, we had a sleeve made that fits over the piano to keep her vocal out of the piano and the piano out of her vocal in case we want to do a punch, fix a piano part or fix a vocal thing. And that's it. Everybody's in the same room. Everybody hears one another. They play off one another like we talked about it earlier. And She's one of my favorites to be in the studio with. And when we did Paul McCartney, Kisses on the Bottom, she was a big part of that.
She's playing piano in that,
She
right?
played piano on that and sang some background parts. I mean, God, I thought I died and went to heaven. It's one of my favorite people in the world I'm in the studio with, and we're having such a good time, you know. I mean, we sat around, and if you read Paul's part in the book, he talks about me telling stories and then him telling stories, and it became just a fun project. It just wasn't like we were making a record. And it was just, we were making a record, but we were having a hell of a good time doing it. And it was just so relaxed. And
just to tell our listeners, so the Frank Sinatra mic, that's the famous mic that's at Capitol Records, right?
Yeah.
And you've thrown this on a few different people that
I
like,
use
what
it
is
all the
this?
time. I use it on Dylan. I use it all the time. It's my go-to mic. I wish I owned it, but it belongs to Capitol.
It's actually on display there, right? So you just go over there and grab it off because when you walk into the studio, it's over there.
No. They have a few of them. There's like
is that right?
There's
Okay.
Like 4 of them. And they're not 47s, they're 48s. And the difference, 47 you can put in Omni.
Okay.
And the 48 you can do cardioid and binaural, you know. So you have 3, on a 47 you have 3 positions. And so it's just a wonderful mic. It doesn't work on everybody, but I try it on everybody, and when it doesn't work, we just switch it. Some girl singers it doesn't quite work right on, so we'll try another mic. I've been using the Audio-Technica has some great mics. Perlman makes that great 47 that I like. It's different than a real 47, but it's really great. It's just got a little brightness to it that I like. I have a great collection of microphones, and I'm in love with mics. You know, they're like works of art, I think.
Yeah, they're like your paintbrushes, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I did want to just briefly talk about that session with Frank Sinatra as well, because in the book you actually say that during the duet session he didn't use that microphone and he instead chose to use a wireless mic that you had on hand. Is that pretty common?
No, it's not common. What happened then? This was near the end of Frank's career, and so when he came in and we were standing there, he said Phil Ramone had built a booth in Studio A.
That's the producer, right, Phil?
Phil, for singers to go in there, and so you had some separation. It was before they had the booths built in. They redesigned the room and put 2 ISO booths, but before that it was just one big room. So Phil had this thing built, and he had air conditioning set into it, and we had a bottle of Jack Daniels. We had a carton of Camel cigarettes, which he liked, and we had a whole bunch of Tootsie Rolls. Frank liked Tootsie Rolls. So I'm standing next to him, and we're right in front of the brass section. And he said to me, "Al, where do you want me?" So I said, "Right in there." And he looked in the room with those big blue eyes, and he looked at me and he said, "I'm not going in there." I said, "Okay, where do you want to be?" He said, "How about right here in front of the band?" Fine, it wasn't my problem, it was Phil's problem. Phil was the one who was going to have to talk him out of it. I said, "Great." And then he said, "And I want a handheld mic. He wanted it to be like a performance.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
That was the whole thing. And then when I caught on to that was it. So we just did the best we could. And, you know, the way he had such great mic technique and all, and the way he would hold the mic, and we was getting not a lot of big band, even though the trombones and trumpets were blowing right at him.
Oh, yeah.
It worked out pretty good. And then the other thing was he did the songs down one time, each song.
And that's very unusual as well, right?
Yeah, really unusual. But he did it like a show.
Yeah.
Every one of them was one take down. The only time he stopped was if the tempo wasn't right. And he did all the counting off, and then he'd stop and he'd go back to the top after maybe 6-8 bars. And that was it. And Phil, God bless him, when, there were certain parts where Frank's voice would not be quite right and so forth. And Phil, he knew just where the duet would go.
Right.
Luther Vandross, he had the spots picked out. So we got rid of some of the spots where Frank wasn't quite on his game, or he got a little frog or something.
Sure.
And so, yeah, God bless Phil. He was amazing. I used to play hooky from school when I was a kid, to go to the Paramount and to see Frank Sinatra. He was my idol. And someone, about 3 months before, I did an article for EQ magazine or one of those, and they asked if I had any regrets, and I said I have one regret. I never got to work with Frank Sinatra. And 3 weeks later, I get the call. I pick the call. It's Phil. Hey, Al, how you doing? I said, great. How are you? What's going on? And we chatted a little. He said, hey, what's your schedule? And he gave me a 3-week kind of period. And I looked and I said, oh, it's great. And he said, what's your fee? And I told him, and that took him back a little. He didn't say anything about it, but I could hear the little pause there or something. And great. And so we chatted some more. And just before we hung up, I said, by the way, who's the artist? He said, Frank Sinatra. I said, Phil, if you'd have told me that in front, I would have done it for nothing. And then he said to me, oh, yeah, well, if you would have asked me for more, I would have given it to you.
Was that originally, when the idea was pitched to you at that point, was it to record them separately, or was it originally going to be
the duets?
The duets. Yeah. Were they going to be together and then that changed?
No.
It
was. They had no idea who was going to do the duets.
Okay.
Oh.
They had a few people in line, but they didn't know who was doing what song, nor did Frank. Frank didn't know.
Did he? I'm sure he had to sign off on all that, right?
He did eventually, yeah. Oh, absolutely. And, but, we were doing EdNet in those days, so we were able to record Charles Aznavour in Paris while we were in New York, and Barbra Streisand in L.A. while we were in New York mixing. And, it was great. And Phil was a genius at those things.
You said he loved the new technology. You're kind of old school, but he was kind of very new school, wasn't he?
Yeah, and, but the funny thing about Phil was that he would see something that was new technology, and he'd say, wow, that's great. I want to use that. Figure out how it works. And he would leave, and we'd have
problem.
We'd have to figure it out, figure out how to do it.
I thought it was really interesting because when I was a kid, there was actually an SNL skit on this very subject. I don't know. Have you seen the skit?
Oh, have I ever?
Was it kind of interesting for you to be like, there's a guy playing me on the TV in satire, but there was a guy in the booth doing the thing. I'm like,
and it was Joe, what's his name?
Joe Piscopo.
Piscopo.
Yeah,
that's hilarious. Yeah, it's great.
So in 1958, you get a job at Radio Recorders, and that brings you to the West Coast, right? And they actually talk about that you brought the Al Schmitt sound. In the book, you talk about it's more like the East Coast sound.
Yeah. Well, it was like we were more into using a lot of tube microphones and things. The Telefunken 47 came out. Back then, you could buy one for $300. And that had come out, and we were using it a lot in the East Coast in New York. So when I came to California, I would use it on the upright bass, and I'd use it on vocals and things. So it got to be that people would come in to see what I was doing because they loved the way the bass sounded or whatever. And so it became, I was bringing the East Coast sound, and it's all bullshit, really.
But I mean, these artists were listening to something that they thought they perceived as different. And they had to have you on their album, right? Yeah.
Exactly. So it was cool.
Yeah, I like the idea that it was because the music itself is an illusion of something else, but you're like, oh, I'm hearing something. And are there certain things that are just illusions in what you do. Like people come to you like, there's Al's the guy, he does this magic, but is it sometimes just the belief that it's magic and they believe it when they hear it?
Well, I think a big part of it is that they hear my work, and then they want to hear, God, I've heard this album or that album, and they want their product to sound that as good as that or whatever. And so, yeah, I get work that way all the time. There's a big difference between getting a bass sound and getting a great bass sound. Yeah. And I get a great bass sound. I just the way I mic things and what I do. And bass players love me. And it's my favorite instrument to record. Not to play. I never wanted to be a bass player. I always wanted to be a drummer. But to record the bass is just when you hear that sound come out of the speakers, especially when it's great articulation and all, and great players. It's great. So, yeah, I have a lot of bass players who think I'm the cat's meow.
You are the cat's meow.
One of the things I did think was really interesting about the artists when you work with them is that you said that a lot of times singers are vulnerable or they feel vulnerable, and it's your job to make sure they feel good. I found that very interesting because I'm not sure if it's always about ego. If they walk in there and they're like, I'm the greatest,"
very few of them walk in there where that, there's a few great ones, Michael Bublé, who say, yeah, I want to be right there in the middle of the musicians, because he knows how good he is and he knows what he can do and he knows what the musicians there do for him and when he's singing. Sinatra was like that, and Natalie Cole had that. Diana has that. And then they're the ones that are not sure their own qualities or whatever, and you have to kind of, rub their back and pat them on the back, and it kind of help the ego along.
Is it more the singers than the other instruments? But if you had to take drums, bass, guitar, and singers, which ones are the most confident and which ones need the most help in the studio?
Wow, I don't know about that. I think the rhythm players are all confident. Drummers, guitar players, bass players, big band. They're all confident. They're doing this every day, 3-4 times a day. I've been doing it for a long time. So they have all the confidence in the world. Singers, some of them do have a lot of confidence and are great. Others, not so. But I know Diana Krall, when she first came to Capitol and we were recording, when she walked down the hall to Studio A and Frank Sinatra is on one wall and Dean Martin is on the other and
McCartney
and everybody is there. She said it gave her inspiration that she was going into this place where all these people recorded, and it was kind of gave her some real inspiration.
That's awesome.
And it worked out really well,
Speaking of Capitol, do you feel the magic? Do you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's really a special place. You know what they have there that it's pretty hard to find anywhere? It's live echo chambers, and they have 8 of them below the parking area. And it's just amazing. And I think every record I've done in the last 25 years at Capitol has the Capitol Live Chamber on it. And it's just amazing what it does to a vocal. It's really cool.
That's awesome. Did you do when you were working with Henry Mancini? Was that at Capitol there? Where were you guys?
No.
Where were you guys?
We were at there was the NBC building, was right on the corner of Sunset and Vine. Mm-hmm. And NBC had moved all their stuff out to Burbank, at a big complex out there. So at that facility, they had the 11 o'clock news. You Bet Your Life with Groucho Marx was done there. Sure. And RCA put in 2 studios. So the first thing I did with with Hank Mancini was at Radio Recorders.
Okay.
Then they opened the studios, RCA. They hired me. I was the first guy they hired. And so we did all the rest of it.
So Breakfast at Tiffany's and
Breakfast at Tiffany, more music from Peter Gunn, Mr. Lucky, Hatari, Two for the Road. I don't know,
on and on.
10, 12 great, unbelievable records with Hank.
You have a great chapter we're talking about Hank Mancini, as you call him. You get your first Grammy nomination for Moon River, right? In 61.
Yeah, I lost.
You lost.
Yeah, I lost that one.
Which is kind of unbelievable because that song is legendary.
It is. Well, it was not for that song. It was just for the album.
For the album.
Breakfast
right,
at Tiffany.
The score.
Which was really cool. The funny thing, Judy Garland won it, but that was just when she made her comeback, and it was a live album recorded at Carnegie Hall. And it was not the greatest sounding record in the world, but I think a lot of sympathy went toward her, and well, it should.
But you do win the next year.
The next year I win for Hatari.
For Hatari, which is also Mancini.
Right.
And in the book, you really break down. Can you describe what the room looked like? I mean, you said there's like in the very back, you had like a carved out tree that they were hitting.
Oh, we had 5 percussionists in the back of the room. Shelly Mann was playing kalimba. Hank brought back all these instruments from Africa when they were over filming Hatari. And we had a log bass.
Log bass, that's what you called it.
Yeah, big log bass. We had those giant 5-foot dried beans that when you hear that.
Oh, like the rain stick kind of thing.
But so we had that going on. Then we had 4 trombones, 4 trumpets, 4 French horns, a rhythm section, a calliope for the baby elephant walk thing, bass flutes that do all that. That was amazing, and all live.
You said it was the hardest recording you've ever done in your life.
It was the most difficult record I ever made. Yeah, and it was
like when you had to go in and mic those instruments you've never even seen before. Like how did you even approach that?
Well, I listened to them. I'd play that, and the guy would play it, and then the mic will go here. I did that on all those instruments to make sure that I knew what they sounded like. Mm. You don't want to put a mic on something if you don't know where the best sound is for it. So that, and then the bass flutes, which was really the most difficult part, but there were four guys playing, so I had mics in the figure 8, and I had 2 on each side, and I had 2 mics, and they were right up on top of the mic blowing, and that's where you got all that air, and it was great. It was tough. I couldn't do it again today.
Is that right? Yeah. What a gratifying Grammy win, though, right?
It was great. And the funny thing about that Grammy, back in those days, there was no TV or anything, so you got the Grammy right away. So we're sitting around, and I'm passing it. It's going around. Everybody's drinking. We're at these round tables and everything. So when the Grammy came back to me, it came back in 2 pieces.
Oh, no.
The horn part just was made out of cast iron. It just came off.
Had to weld it back together.
So I got a new one. They gave me a new one. So, and we were just. Can I tell one little story?
Yes, please.
I'm heading to Las Vegas to see my son and his family, and my grandson is 6, and he calls me on the phone and said, "Hey, Gramps, can you bring a Grammy for show and tell at the class?" I said, "Sure, yeah, absolutely." So my wife and I, we go to Vegas and spending time, and I go to the school that got the Grammy, and the guy before me is a fireman. And he's talking about saving lives and saving cats.
Real heroes.
And real stuff, how do you follow? I'm sitting there thinking, how do I follow this guy? This is a real hero. I've gone up a tree to save a cat and all the different things and pulling little children out of homes that were burning. And I'm thinking, oh, Christ. So anyway, so now it's my turn, and I put the Grammy down on the desk of one of the kids, and they start passing it around. And they're asking me, do you know Michael Jackson? Do you know Janis Jackson? You know, all the little stuff that these kids would think about. And so we're talking, and kid in the back of the room, he's got the Grammy, and he said, my dad's got one of these. And I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. I mean, here I am out in a little school in Vegas, and his father's got a Grammy. I said, wow, that's amazing. I said, what did he get it for? He said, bowling. So that put it in its perspective, man, right away. I said, oh, okay.
Did that Grammy come back to you in one piece?
Yeah, it did. That one did. Yeah. I have 23 Grammys, and
counting.
Well, 5 of them are the little ones.
The early
yeah,
ones.
they wanted everybody to turn them in.
Oh, is that right?
and get the bigger ones, but I wouldn't do it. I kept my.
That's the one they gave you, right?
Those. Ah. Yep. So I have those.
When you're working on an album and you hear a song for the first time and you bring the faders up as we talk, has there ever been a moment where one of the giant hits that you worked on, do you know it right away when you first hear it, or is it one of those things that like, oh, that's pretty good, it's a hit all of a sudden?
When we did Unforgettable, obviously that was you know, we knew that was
going to be big.
That was going to go through the roof. Todo.
I was going to say
first thing
Africa and
before Africa was Rosanna.
Yeah,
man, it just came out of the speakers. It was a second take.
Yeah,
and it's just boom. You knew it was something special.
In the Rosanna song, I was just talking with some friends the other day, and I think personally, and I said this, and it was before we had set this up, that the little fill in that song is probably the greatest little fill to any song ever. This one, and you talk about this in the book, but when I first heard it, I actually thought it was a sample, like a sample of trumpets. And then I'm thinking, wait, I don't know if that technology would have even been around that time. It is pristine.
Yeah,
that little. And I'm like listening. I went back and listened to it, and it's horns.
Yeah,
it's like
Sherry Hay did the arrangements, and he's the best horn arranger in the world. And in those days, he was just everybody wanted him. He's an amazing guy, and yeah, that's Sherry Hay.
Yeah, it sounds good.
Yeah, that was fun record, man, and I just had a great time with the guys. I knew all the guys. I had worked with Jeff forever. You know, I did like 12 albums, and he was the drummer on every one of them.
Oh, was that right?
Mm-hmm.
That's how I got the gig. That something happened with whoever was going to do it, and it didn't work out. And Jeff said, "Hey, man, Al Schmitt gets a great drum sound. Let's bring Al in, man." And so they hired me, and I went over and I remember they were going through stuff, and I got my sounds, and I get sounds really quick. So David Page says to Jeff, when's Al going to get sounds? And I hit the talk back, and I said, I got him. Come on in and listen. And so they came in. This was the first time they ran it down all the way. They came in and heard it, and it just sounded amazing. And they were like, oh, my God, this is cool. So they went and did one more take, and that's Rosanna.
Is that right?
Second
take. Wow.
Yeah.
Have you
that piano solo on out? That's David. Yeah.
Do you have any comments on the kind of? There's been like a little bit of a resurgence in a way.
A total resurgence of Africa. Yeah.
Of Africa. It's
Absolutely.
like constantly used in videos, and this genre called yacht rock.
Yeah.
It really praises and holds those songs at a very high pedestal.
And I was in. I go to Africa. I've been there 3 times, and I love it there. And when they found out that I did Africa there, I became a hero there. So, you know, it was like, wow.
That could have gone
the other way. You did Africa, yeah, wow. No, it was just, it was really cool.
Tell us in the book you talk about this. Tell us about the
drum loop.
Yeah.
Well, what happened was before we started, Jeff went out and he played like 32 bars. Kept playing the same figure over for about 32 bars. And then he came in and we listened down and he picked 2 bars. We made the mark and we edited, we made a loop and we put it out around
because it was too long for the machine, right?
Yeah. So we put it around a microphone stand and back, so it just kept going around like this, and that was it. That's
and it's through the whole song, right?
Through the whole song.
Until I read that part, I had to go listen to the to the song again. I'm like, it's there through the whole part. It's it's amazing.
Jeff was an amazing drummer and an amazing guy, but he was the best drummer I worked with.
Is that right?
At that time, there was nobody like him. He was just amazing. He had such a great feel for things. He and Steve Gadd is another one that's got that kind of thing where they just lock into the tune right away.
Is there a reason why he wanted a loop instead of just to play it through the whole time?
Yeah, because he plays fills over that.
Totally. That's why. So
that was just the basis.
That's why I didn't think it went through the whole song because it's like, this isn't through the whole song, but it totally is. It's always there.
Yeah.
Cool. I got to tell you, when I read your book from cover to cover, thank you. I had my Alexa sitting next to me because every time you started talking about George Benson, I was like, Alexa, play Africa by Todo. And I'm reading how you put it all together while listening to it.
It's
actually kind of amazing.
I've
never done that before. All your best work is on Alexa.
I know. I should do that. Wow.
Can we talk about Sam Cooke a little bit? So you started working with Sam Cooke, obviously early in the early 60s.
Yeah.
And you guys became really good friends, right?
Absolutely. I didn't when the night he was killed. We were talking about, I became his producer. The original guys, Hugo and Luigi, left RCA to start their own label, Avco Embassy. And so they were looking for a producer for Sam, and Sam said, hey, man, how about Al? I've been working with Al forever, and we get along really well. And so I got the gig to produce him, and it was great.
You did Live at the Copa, obviously.
I produced that. I did,
City.
Shake. Got the whole world shaking when a boy falls in love. But then I recorded Cupid and Bring It On Home, Another Saturday Night, all those things. So they were huge. He was amazing. Amazing. One of the most talented. First of all, he could sing. He could write. Excuse me. He was a great writer. He was great. Everything was done live with him. When we did Bring It On Home with him and Lou Rawls. Lou was like 21 years old. That was live right in with the band. So back then, everything was live, It wasn't... those were wonderful times. And we had dinner at Martoni's, which was a favorite watering hole for musicians and a really good restaurant. And we were talking about the next album. We were going to do a blues album. And we had a great dinner. We were going to meet on the weekend at his house and go over material songs and see which ones he wanted to do and whatever. And I left. I had to go see another act. And so my wife and I left to go see this other act. And then I got home. I got a call about 5 a.m. from Lester Sill. And he told me Sam had been shot. And I got up and started to get dressed. I where is he? What hospital? And all. He said, no, Al, he's dead. So then, from that moment on, it was like every 10 minutes the phone rang. Right. I was getting calls from London and all over the world wanting to know what happened.
Not a lot of information, I'm sure. That.
No, my wife at the time was a reporter. So
really? Okay.
She was able to go and get the police report. So we had a little more information.
I mean, there's still kind of mystery around that.
Yeah. Nobody knows what happened. Some people are still blaming Arnold Klein.
Yeah, his manager. Right?
Yeah,
do you fall into that category?
He's the guy that wound up with the Rolling Stones.
And they signed the Beatles.
And he's the guy that broke up the Beatles.
He broke up the Beatles. Yeah, you could say that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So he's dead now. So it doesn't matter what they find.
True.
But he wound up with all the publishing.
Oh, is that right? Yeah, it's a little suspicious.
I'm saying he had a motive.
Yeah, there are a lot of stuff going on.
Man, what a voice. You also have a really great story about, I guess, when you were getting ready before you did Live at the Copa, that you got to meet one of his Sam Cooke's good friends.
Yeah, that was a great afternoon. Cassius Clay. It was Muhammad Ali, but he was not Muhammad Ali at that point. And I was staying across the street at a hotel, and I would go over to Sam's suite, and we'd talk about what we're doing and what the Copa was going to be like and so forth. And I went over one afternoon, and they're sitting there, Muhammad Ali and Sam. Sam was helping Muhammad to do his vocal. He was doing a vocal, Stand By Your Man. He was doing a record for Columbia, and Sam was helping him with the vocal phrasing and stuff. Interesting. But I spent the whole afternoon there on the floor most of the time. I was laughing so hard. They were so irreverent.
Two characters.
With one another, and they loved one another, but they were so funny. That's one of those things where you wish you could have recorded it. It was amazing.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was a great experience.
You talk a little bit about, and you probably did this, I think you were kind of doing this when you're talking about the big bands and the big orchestras, is that you like to, like you said with Hatari, you need to be in the room to listen to it so that you know what it sounds like when you go behind the glass.
Absolutely.
Right?
It's hard to capture what an instrument sounds like if you don't know what it sounds like, you know. I don't understand guys that just come in and push up the fader. They have a mic out there and they push up the fader and think that's it. I always go out and listen to what the musician is doing, always. And then I get my sounds, because I know what I have to capture now.
So would you say that your role is to capture the true sound? It's not to enhance it any? Or is your ultimate goal to just recreate exactly what you hear?
I think that's what I do best, is that I capture what's going on out in the room. I don't use EQ. I use my microphones for EQ.
Would you say, though, that sometimes in the booth, when you're done with your job, it sounds better than when you were in the room?
Oh, well, and sometimes because of the enhancement with the live chambers and what we can do with reverb and so forth. Yeah, that, absolutely.
Well, I just think that you can't put your ear up against every single instrument and hear it in that individualized way, but you kind of have a control over that at least in the booth.
You don't do it that way. I mean, if there's 4 trumpets playing, you don't listen to each trumpet. You listen to all 4 and see what that sound is. Same with the trombones or saxophones.
So, in essence, you try to capture something in the essence of being natural and organic. It's not like you're sticking your ear next to everything. It's I want to capture this idea in a way that seems organic and real.
If I'm doing an orchestra, strings and woodwinds and so forth, I stand out by the conductor and listen to what's going on. Then I go inside and I try to capture that, what I heard. And there were times when maybe the French horns are going to be too loud and they're leaking and everything. Mm-hmm. I go out and I talk to the conductor and I say, at bar 42, can you keep the French horns down a little? They're coming and everything. It's a little too loud. Or in bar 63, I need more cello. Can you help me there? And it's teamwork, So when it comes to a French horn, he's this way and they don't play as loud, so I'm not getting him in every mic. And the same with the cello, he's doing this and they playing out a little more, and so it's a team that makes these records, not just one guy.
You don't have an innate fear of the French horn. You brought that up.
Yeah.
I feel like there's something about French horns that
it goes the wrong way, right?
I have a good Frank Sinatra story about French horn. They were at Frank and Jilly, his best friend, were at Carnegie Hall, and there was a symphony going on, and they were sitting there, and Jilly said, "Hey, Frank, what's that instrument there, the round thing? You see the guy put his fist in it, and he said, that's a French horn, Jilly." He said, "Oh." And Frank said, "Why?" He said, "Well, do they get the same money that everybody else gets?" And Frank says, "Yeah, why?" He said, "They haven't played a a note in 20 minutes.
Yeah. No, correct me if I'm wrong. Going back to Sinatra, that was the last time he recorded, right? Was with you.
It was, yep.
And
I did his last recording.
And you said earlier that your uncle's studio was where Sinatra's first recording.
Yeah.
So
and that's in the book.
So that's kind of like
not in my book, in one of
a bit of your family legacy there, right?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
It's kind of amazing.
Yeah.
Going back to like recording, you recorded in the Taj Mahal, right?
Yeah.
With Paul Horn.
Yeah.
How do you even approach something like that?
Wow. Yeah. Well, it was just Paul with a bunch of flutes. He had wooden flutes and Chinese flutes and all kinds of flutes, and a cantor who kind of did some chanting thing. And we went to see Rajiv Gandhi, who was the Prime Minister of India at that time, and got permission to go in. And we went in with at night, and we had the army outside. It was unbelievable. They didn't want anybody doing anything. And we set up, we had 2 mics, one for the cantor, one for the flutes, and a DAT recorder. And we had to wait for the pigeons. Taj Mahal is open at the top. There's windows, and the pigeons come in and settle in there. So we had to wait for the cooing and all, to settle down. And finally it did, And, it's like a 14.5-second delay in the Taj Mahal. It's almost like an echoplex.
Wow.
So in the middle, we're recording and everything's going along, and all of a sudden we hear splat, bap, 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 bap. It was pigeon
raining.
And now we had to stop and go back to the front and wait a little while and then come back down and start again.
Part of the adventure.
Yeah, we couldn't get it done in one day. We was only supposed to do one day, but because of that, we wound up being in there 2 days.
Does that happen often that you have to delay because of pigeon shit?
That's seems the like first time in my life, First time I've, not only pigeon shit, but pigeon cooing, because we had to wait until they all settled down at night and stopped. And
was there a point where are they ever going to go to sleep?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, we thought, holy, what's going on here?
You talked about your uncle a lot in the book, and that he kind of set you on your way. Is he still with us today?
No, he passed away a long time ago.
Did he get a chance to see your success grow?
No, not really. No, he passed away, and I often think of. I wish he could see what I've done, and all the accolades and so forth that I've gotten. He'd be very proud. Yeah, he was a cool guy.
Yeah, that's great.
Smoked a big cigar all the time. Always had a big roll of cash.
That was the usual, right?
He really dressed.
Yeah, you kind of said it was like good. You mentioned Goodfellas in your book.
Yeah,
that was the world I kind of thought of too.
Yeah, he, all his suits would. Taylor would come in and, measure him for suits stuff. Yeah. He had a convertible, a beautiful new convertible. He had everything in the world, He was like a movie star. Beautiful wife. I mean, she looked like a movie star. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, the temptation of the music business, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to do that.
Yeah, that doesn't seem like a big leap.
I want to be just like him.
So talk to us a little bit about working with Bob Dylan, because the albums that you worked with him on, he's doing the Great American Songbook.
Yeah.
And I love in your book, you actually say, I didn't really know if he could pull this off.
Yeah.
And tell us about how he would prepare before singing.
Well, it was amazing. We did 52 songs. We did 3 albums. And first one had 10 songs, second one had 11, and the last one, Triplicate, had 30 songs. So what happened, he came in, he loved this Studio B. Before that, I get a call from his manager, are you available for Bob Dylan? I thought, oh man, yeah, I've always wanted to work with Bob Dylan. Well, I was busy the time they wanted. And so his manager said, well, maybe next time, and that was it. And I said to my wife, God damn, I wish I could have done that. There's no way I could get out of the other thing. I wouldn't do that. Next morning, I get a call from Bob Dylan's manager saying, Bob really wants you, so he's willing to move his time. So they moved their time to adjust to my schedule, which I thought was pretty cool. And actually, I had never met Bob. So then we go in, we're standing in the room, and this is similar to the Frank Sinatra thing. We're in the middle of B, and Chandler Harrod, who was my assistant on the first dates with Bob, he said, boy, it sounds good in here. And Chandler said, well, where do you want to be? And Bob said, well, how about right here?
Right where I'm standing.
And so Chandler said, here's good. And he put the mic, the Sinatra mic, right there. And then Bob, I got from his manager that he didn't want to see a lot of microphones. So I had to go about setting up using as few microphones as possible and keeping them hidden. So there was a rhythm guitar, acoustic guitar here, and I had a mic there, but he would have had to turn his head to see it. And then I had the bass, upright bass here, and I had the mic down real low and over to the side, so he would have had to look over that way to see it. Then on the drums, I had just one mic, a C24 stereo mic overhead. Then I had the electric guitar, and I had his amp behind him, so it was blowing into his back, and I had the mic behind him. So he couldn't even see that.
So they're all hidden, basically.
And the same with the steel guitar. So there were no mics. Yeah. So that was it. And when he came in after the first playback, he came in, he said, Al, my voice hasn't sounded this good in 40 years.
That Frank Sinatra mic saves you again, huh?
Yep, absolutely.
Talk about and going back to Sinatra, like that was his influence, right? Like you said, he brought in a boombox and he would listen to the Sinatra right before he.
What he would do is he had a little player, and the song we were going to do, he'd listen over and over again, not to duplicate what Frank did, but to understand what Frank did and how he interpreted the song and everything. And he'd do that and then go over it with the musicians. And we'd do that for about 2 hours. And then we would record, and we'd get one song in 3 hours. A couple times we got two. But that was pretty much it. Then we'd take a 2-hour break. He would go out to the hotel he was staying at right by the studio, and we'd have a great dinner, the band and my assistant and I. And then he'd come back at 8 o'clock, and we'd go till about 10:30. 5 days a week, no weekends. I mean, it was perfect, and it was pleasant. And the first night, we played back the two things we did, one in the afternoon, one at night, and he was standing right in front of the console, and I was behind him. And he turned around, and he kind of had a smile on his face. So I went up, and I grabbed him and gave him a big hug. And he stiffened up, and I thought, oh, shit.
What have I done?
This was a mistake. And then I looked at him again, and then he just had this big smile on his face, and he hugged me back. And from then on, it was high fives and fist bumps and stuff. It was really cool. And I had a great time with him.
It's amazing.
Yeah, he was really cool.
You have a great story, too, about working with Neil Young and how... Talking about one-take wonders. He didn't even let you mix one of the albums. You still want to mix it.
On the beach. Yeah, those were the rough mixes. He fell in love with them, and that was it.
I think either after that or before that, didn't he do an album that was like in a direct to vinyl little booth? He like did an entire thing at Third Man Records where he just went in this little booth and recorded songs direct to like a piece of vinyl there.
I wouldn't be a bit surprised because almost everything we did with Neil was take one.
Is that right?
Yeah, he's very fast. And when we did the 100-piece orchestra, we had 65-piece musicians and 35-piece vocal choir, all live and at Sony Scoring Stage. And Neil stood right next to the conductor on mic, sang live in front of everybody, and everything was take one or take two.
You talk about that too with Sinatra, because he just ran through the songs once. how do you deal with the pressure of like, this is it? Like there's almost no take two.
Well, I think that comes with experience, and that, you don't, you're going to be able to do it and you got it down. And it's also about being prepared. I don't know if I talk enough about it in the book, but, about getting there early and checking every microphone out, checking phasing, checking so that everything is working. The echoes are right. We have everything set. And 20 minutes before the date, we sit back with a cup of coffee and wait for everybody to show up. So it's a matter of being prepared. And, you got a 40-piece orchestra. You don't want to walk in 10 minutes before or a half hour before. You're sure going to have trouble.
Yeah, I just kept thinking about the battery in that microphone. Like, what if the battery in the microphone for Frank's microphone went down?
Well, we had guys sitting around ready
like the ball boys in Wimbledon.
Exactly. We had for the strings and all. We had 67s. We had guys sitting with mics warmed up. If a mic went bad, you could change it in a minute. And one of the kids came in and he said, everybody called Sinatra Mr. S. He said, Mr. S, just talk to me. He said, really? What did he say? He said, you kid, get the fuck out of my way.
That's the best thing you could ever have. I would kill for that. He's so good. Get the fuck out of my way. Obviously all these stories are in the book, but there's also a whole section of the book where you actually do talking about how detailed you are and how prepared you are, where you talk about how you usually mic pretty much every instrument. Like, I mean, there's a real, science to it and how you do it, which I think would be amazing for any of the, real audiophiles that want to get into the granular aspect. And then at the back of the book, my absolute favorite part is you have the diagrams of like where Sinatra was, and you put a big X over the voice. You're like, he's not stepping in there. But the same thing with Dylan and Neil Young, like where they were, Ray Charles and stuff like that. Sometimes with all the technology that they have, I feel like you probably deal with this with some of the younger engineers that, they won't just leave it alone. Like there was one part in the book where you're talking about when you had, Ray Charles and Betty Carter, where like when it was time for the saxophone player solo, he just stood up and just leaned into the mic. Like it was that simple.
Yeah.
I don't know. I thought it was kind of amazing.
Yeah.
And I also think, we had talked about this before, and back in the days of mono, the boards only had very few inputs compared to the capabilities we have now.
When I started, we only had 8 inputs, so you could only put up 8 mics. When I did the Duke Ellington thing, that was 8 mics. That was it. But Tommy Dowd had done big band things before, and I had a book that he bought me, and I drew diagrams of all the setups. So when I realized I had to do it, I went through the book and found a setup and knew where he put the mics in. So at least I had a place to start.
One of the things that I once read about Jack White is that in order to inspire creativity, he likes to limit himself. So in one of the albums, he limited himself to 3. There's only 3 instruments ever running at any time, and everything about the 3 colors of the album, this type of thing, of limiting, inspiring creativity. Is that your kind of experience as well? When things were limited to a more raw form, like they were back in the day, did you think that things were more creative during that time period?
Yeah, they probably were, because you had to do everything right then and there. I mean, it was no, okay, we'll overdub that later or fix that later. And especially when we were doing stuff on acetate before we even got the first tape machine, there was no editing. At least when you got the tape machine, we could edit from take 2 to take 3 and, take an intro or a solo. But we couldn't do that when you were doing disc. So, yeah, it was. I think it was a more creative period. Absolutely.
Do you think that there is a 5-year span of time where the best music was made?
No, not necessarily. I think it was a lot more than 5 years, because there was a lot of great music made in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. I think it started when the rap thing started coming in. Things started changing, and sounds started changing, and guys doing all the stuff in their home and things like that. there was one period of time everything was being done with drum machines. Mm-hmm. So drummers were being put out of work. It was just insane. And you hear those things with drum machines, and it's like there's no breathing, none of that stuff, no emotion to it really. So I think that was, that was a time when it was kind of sad that was going on.
You talk a lot about that in the book, that, people would be like, what's your secret? And it's like, I put my emotion in the work. Like, that's a big thing for you, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I also found it very interesting that you often talk about producing everything together, and you like the big rooms filled with a lot of instruments. Is that a typical technique still used across the board? Or is it possible with electronics and everything that how often does a producer and an engineer record each element separately on a separate track and then just put them together in the end?
It happens. It's not. I don't think it happens all the time. But in some cases, you might have strings and woodwinds and then brass and French horns, and so you might do the strings and woodwinds and then overdub the brass. But it's all done at the same time. So the strings do their part, and then they sit, and then the brass and French horns will do their part. It's all done at one time.
Are the singers are the pop singers, from your experience and what you've seen and heard, is the quality of their talent lessening for a commercial sheen at all?
Yeah, I think so. I think there was a thing called microphone techniques, which all the great singers had. Sam Cooke had it, Frank Sinatra had it. Rosemary Clooney was unbelievable. Rosemary Clooney, you would just set the fader. She'd start singing, you set the fader at a level and forget it.
Walk away, huh?
You just go, you work on everything else around her. She leaned in on the low notes, she backed off on the high notes. When it was a P, she'd just lift the head a little bit so the pop would go over the top. It's a lost art. Now they get on the mic and sing as loud as they can or as soft as they can, and it doesn't change.
One of the other issues that audiophiles talk about is the loudness wars, and you did have a little bit. Do you care to elaborate on your particular?
Yeah, I belong to a thing called Turn It Up, and it's one of those things that if you want it louder, go to your and turn it up. We do. I mean, this thing of crunching everything on masters and the mastering guys fighting with one another, the shootouts, who could make the loudest one, that kind of stuff, that really irritated me. Just terrible. Because everything started getting compressed like crazy. And I don't use compression. I hate it. I use a little bit of compression on the bus when I'm mixing, but just maybe a dB or two. And I use mostly for getting the tube sound, and that's it.
And when you say tube sound, what is your kind of take on analog versus digital? Because you do you have an affinity towards tubes? Do you when you listen to vinyl as compared to?
Yeah, I listen to vinyl at home all the time, and tubes. My preference is tube microphones. Mm-hmm. When I can, and not on every instrument. Certain instruments you don't want the tube sound. I just have my go-to things that I do, and I love the way tubes sound. And I can't mix in a box. I don't know how to mix in a box, so everything I do I mix on a large console, and it's me and. If you want that mix in a box kind of thing, there are a lot of guys out there that do it really, really well. Mm. So hire them. But if you want what I do, then you call me and hire me.
In your opinion, does the superior quality or the aesthetic of vinyl, does it come from the format itself or the fact that maybe possibly someone went back and just put a little more tender loving care in the transfer?
Oh, I don't think that's the case. I only listen to vinyl at home. I love the fact that after 16 or 17 minutes, you got to get up, turn the record over and put it down. I I like that. It gives me a breather or something, and usually in those days the first cut was the killer cut on side one, and the second best one was the killer cut on the other side. So you got that to look forward to as you flip it over. And as you know, my wife's an audiophile, so she's. I better be right in my house.
What do you guys listen to at the house?
Oh, listen, okay. She loves classical music, and she listens to a lot of classical music. But we listen to all kinds of stuff, and now it's starting Friday. It's going to be Christmas time in the house, and we have an incredible Christmas album selection. So
those will be on heavy rotation,
Johnny Mathis and all the old timers and.
Sure.
Stuff. So it's very festive around our house.
I love that. I love that you answered it that way, because I was thinking so audiophile. I actually meant the gear, but you did. Oh. You gave the right answer by talking about the music. With the audiophile guys, there's a bit of a switch. I was actually wondering about what kind of gear you listen to.
Well, I have self-powered tannoy speakers. I have California audio devices, CD player. Thing. I have a great Audio-Technica turntable and a top-of-the-line Audio-Technica pickup, and that's pretty much it. I don't listen on phones ever. I try to stay away from that.
Since we just put out this book, I guess you had to kind of do some deep diving into your own life and your work. Is there anything that you went back and listened to while working on this book? You're like, man, that's pretty amazing. That's pretty good.
Well,
anything you rediscovered?
Nothing specifically. It just, I discovered how much I love what I do and how much how blessed I am to be able to do what I do. And that was really a big part of it. When the book was done and everything was done, there were a lot of stories that I wish I had put in the book. That's going to have to be volume 2, I think. If
Looking
that's
forward
going to
to
happen.
it. That's great.
If that happens, the book is doing really well. I'm really surprised at how well it's doing, and I'm getting such great feedback and great reviews on it. So let's hope. People are talking about how it should be in every music school should have the book and so forth, and so we'll see. It's doing really well right now, and maybe with Christmas, go out and buy the book as a gift.
Amazon,
great Christmas present.
Amazon.com.
Yeah, or Hal Leonard, either one.
Is there any session that you've worked on that you forgot about, and then you heard the song on the radio, and you're like, oh yeah, I was there?
There's one. I don't think I've mentioned this in the book. So I'm working on a Saturday, and Marty Page, the arranger, Sammy Davis, we're doing What Kind of Fool Am I? And the producer never showed up. He forgot about the date. It was a Saturday afternoon. So we recorded it, and a couple takes. Sammy was so quick with everything. And that was it. But the guy got credit for producing the record and, whatever. And then there was another one where they hired this young guy, and I'm not going to mention names now, but they hired this young guy to produce Sammy. And this was at RCA. And so Sammy comes in. We just did a take, and Sammy comes in to listen to the take. Okay, we go over everything, and then the guy had a couple of things he wanted Sammy to try to do or something. Sammy got back, told him what he was going to do and how he felt about that. And everything was good, And Sammy turns and starts to walk away and go in the control room. And the kid, he's 21 years old now, this kid. And he says, okay, Sambo, go get him. Well, to call Sammy Davis Sambo is the worst thing in the world you could have done. And Sammy stopped dead in his tracks. And he turned around and he said, it's Mr. Davis. From now on, Mr. Davis. So every time the kid wanted to hit the talk back and talk to him, he had to call him Mr. Davis. So I think he learned a lesson that time.
Yeah.
So you've made your career, your life about listening, and your ears over time obviously had to be trained to get to the level that they're at. For our listeners, how does one train their ears to better listen, in your opinion?
I don't listen loud at all. And when I'm working with bands and they want it cranked up, I show them where the fader is, to turn it up and put it where you want. I walk outside, and I stay outside. I just don't, and that's what saved my ears all these years. I don't listen loud. And anywhere, in the car or at home, I try to keep it down. And maybe that's what's helped, that I can do it for so long. But I'm not sure. And I get my ears cleaned every 6 months. I go to a specialist who cleans my ears out.
Those are the money makers, man.
Checks me out, every 6 months, and it's great.
Has there been anything about your journey that has helped train you to listen for high quality, like what sounds right? Is there any,
I think it's just experience of doing it every day. And, when I was at RCA, I worked 6 days a week. I do a session from 9 to 12, 2 to 5, and 8 to 11, 6 days a week. So, and I would do Ike and Tina Turner, and then I do a polka record, and then I do a big band with a singer, Billy Eckstein, Billy May, and then the next day I'd be doing classical recording, and then an orchestra, big string section at night. So it was different music all the time, and I got to learn. I mean, I hated polka music. It just
the accordion, just not your thing.
But that was it. When I was doing the first polka music, I was going to get the best accordion sound that anybody ever got, and that's what I focused on: the sound of the instruments and getting that. And that saved because polka music was just not in me at all. I'm a bebop.
What a surprise.
I was a bebopper and a jazz guy all my life.
Sure.
So, that, and country music, I got to work with Bobby Bear and a lot of country artists. And I learned to accept it and to really like it. Certain artists I really like. So, yeah.
Are there any kind of parting words of wisdom you would like to let the listeners of the podcast know?
Just anybody that wants to be an engineer, don't let anybody tell you can't do it. Number one, and number two, follow your heart. I mean, if you really want to do this, just do it, and you'll have a great life. It's can you imagine going to the studio every day, listening to music and different artists, and sometimes artists that were your idols. Don't give up. Don't let anybody tell you can't do it. If you believe in yourself, do it.
Fantastic.
And bathe regularly if you're in
that's right.
Oh, that's very important.
I love that part. That was actually my favorite.
And one other thing is, and if anybody offers you a mouth mint,
don't
take
it.
No, take it. There's a reason.
I was going back to the Jefferson Airplane.
Don't
drink everything.
But watch your drinks.
Yeah.
Watch your drinks.
But that's not happening anymore. So
no, you think?
Thank God. I don't think.
Yeah, you'll have to read about that in the book. The book is Al Schmitt on the Record: The Magic Behind the Music. Check it out at your local bookstore, Amazon.com, or where else? Where else can they get it?
Oh, Hal Leonard, I think. That's the publisher. Thank you, guys.
So much, Al.
Thanks, boss.
You're welcome.
The Occasional Podcast is a production of the Part-Time Audiophile Network, which includes PartTimeAudiophile.com, The Occasional Magazine, the PTA Newsletter, and Audiohead.com. You can stay in touch with us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. The Occasional Podcast is produced and hosted by Brian Hunter, executive produced by Scott Hall at PTA Productions. If you haven't already, please subscribe to The Occasional Podcast on iTunes, Google, Spotify, or wherever your favorite podcasts are downloaded.